If I had to make a decision again for my third birth, I definitely would do a... Hey friends, welcome back to the Work From Homesteader. I am back and I am now a mom of two. Baby girl made her entrance a little bit unexpectedly, a little less than 2 weeks ago. She came at 37 weeks, 5 days. And it has just been a whirlwind the last 2 weeks. We definitely were not prepared as we should have been for baby girl's quick arrival. But we are nonetheless excited to be in the 2 under 2 fam. So the purpose of this video is really just to talk through the two different kind of common ways to give birth, and the first being with an epidural and the second being unmedicated. Now I have done both, and so I think I kind of have a good experience to talk on both. Now what I want you to remember in this video is that this is all anecdotal, right? This is my experience with my body and my care teams, and everyone's experience will likely be different. I'm sure you've heard tons of different people's stories, and however, you know, whether they're traumatic or not, I think a lot of people are going to have their own opinions on what the best way to give birth is. And I really think at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you do your own research. You understand what your options are, no matter which way you decide to give birth. And I hope that this is kind of just something that I can provide in this video, is another just perspective and experience on giving birth, whether that be with an epidural or unmedicated. So with that, I just want to kind of first talk about my son's birth. So that was a little less than 2 years ago, and that was done with an epidural. So I initially kind of always had planned for the most part an epidural. So giving birth unmedicated really made me nervous, and I just didn't want to do an unmedicated birth. And everyone that I had talked to for the most part had done an epidural, and so I really didn't have anyone besides my mother-in-law, who she gave birth, you know, in the 80s and 90s, where having an epidural was kind of a little bit newer and not, I don't want to say pushed, but encouraged as much as it is today. So from her perspective, it was a little bit different, whereas it wasn't as much of a thing. So I didn't really have a lot of people to have to get their experience on actual unmedicated birth. And so for me, it was just like, duh, I'll get an epidural. It seems like the way to go. It seems like no pain. Why wouldn't I do that? And so with my son, I started to have contractions about 24 hours before he was actually born. And it started with just kind of like, you know, minor cramps. That's typical. And then they started to build throughout the night and got progressively more painful. We went in around like 2 a.m. I wasn't really sure like what the signs of real labor were. I wasn't dilated enough. They sent me home. And then we went back around 9 a.m. and then they decided to admit me because I was dilated enough. My cervix was effaced, all that stuff. And at that point, they asked me if I wanted the epidural, and I said, yes, give me that epidural. Not really understanding everything that really entailed. And that was like something that I wish I had done beforehand, just understanding like what the like side effects or what can happen with an epidural. Now, this is probably about like 9 a.m. They gave me epidural, and honestly, getting the epidural was kind of painful. And I did not like my anesthesiologist. She was not very helpful in the situation. And then this will kind of become a little bit of a theme with my care. Now I had great, awesome nurses, nothing to complain about with my nurses. They were very helpful, but then, you know, probably like 30 minutes, hour later, they decided that they were also going to give me Pitocin, because they told me because of my epidural, my labor had slowed down. And now I didn't really like know that that was a thing. I knew what Pitocin was, and my sister had to have it because she had to be induced because of like other medical issues that had happened at the time. So I was familiar with it, but I like didn't understand that the epidural can slow it. Now, you know, there's kind of conflicting evidence on whether that actually is something that happens or like is correlated, but anecdotally I think a lot of people will say that an epidural does slow down their labor. And so at that point I had to get Pitocin, and of course you can't eat once you get your epidural. That's something to be to definitely know as well. And so really I hadn't eaten since like probably like noon the day before. So you start to get a little hungry, and all you can have is like little ice, ice or like juice, anything that's like liquids. But then, I really kind of like stalled. I didn't really do like have any progression probably until like, I had like slow progression, but I didn't even get started for labor until like 5 or 6 p.m. that evening, probably about 5. And that's when they decided to kind of like lift me up and put me like up so that gravity would kind of help like encourage the baby to go down the birth canal. And then, they wanted to kind of do that for about 30 minutes to an hour just to like let gravity do its thing. And I was like, okay, this is normal, whatever. And then they were like, okay, we're gonna break your water and we're gonna start to push. And mind you, when I got the epidural, I want to back up a little bit. When I got the epidural, I did not realize that I would like not be able to move at all. Like my entire right leg was completely numb. And my husband, when I did start to push, he had to like hold up my leg. And I've heard that this happens to a lot of people, and I don't really know like what the proper thing to say to the anesthesiologist, that you do, like you want to be able to feel something. And I don't know like to what level they can control it. If anyone knows, please let me know in the comments. But like this for me was a huge reason and why I started to consider doing an unmedicated birth in my next labor. When I started to think back about it, that I like couldn't move or feel anything. And when it came to pushing, I honestly didn't know if I was like pushing, because you really can't feel anything, so you have no feedback. And so I ended up pushing for 2 hours, and they were talking about all sorts of other interventions. They were starting to like lose the heartbeat at some points, or they couldn't like monitor it. They were talking about like suctioning him out, and then like possibly C-section if I didn't push him out soon enough. And so like that was really scary for me, and those were also things that I just like hadn't considered like or researched beforehand. And that's kind of where I'm coming back to like my initial intro, where I just say like, if you want to do an epidural birth, like go for it. Like this is not me convincing you not to do an epidural birth, but like this is me convincing you to know like what the possible interventions are if things aren't going exactly according to your birth plan. Because I really didn't know the risks of like suctioning. They were telling me as I was like possibly gonna like have to do it, and that was really scary for me, because you have to make a medical decision for like you and your baby, and you don't have any like background on it. And so they're like, oh, it's a 1% risk of like something going wrong, and I'm like, holy, like when that's happening to you, like that seems like a lot. And so you're making these decisions and you really don't like have enough of a background on it. And then a C-section, that was terrifying to me too. Luckily, I was able to push him out naturally. And so that was like, it ended up not being a problem. But then, when you get Pitocin and you have like all the hormones on top of it, you get a lot of the shakes. And so for me, what was really sad is that like I could really only hold my baby for a few minutes before I had to hand him off to my husband to hold and feed for the first time. I couldn't even breastfeed him. We had to formula feed him because I was so shaky and weak after all of the medications and not eating for 36 hours. I felt like just too uncomfortable holding him because I was so shaky and just kind of a little bit out of it too. And so like I didn't get like that initial bonding time or really like any of that, which was really sad for me looking back. And so that was kind of like part of why, when I started to think back on it, why I really wanted to start to consider unmedicated birth for my second child. So I kind of had thought about it in the initial kind of months, but I hadn't really made any like huge decision one way or the other on whether I wanted to do an unmedicated birth until I really started to get to like the 7 to 8 months. And that is kind of late to start figuring that out. And on top of that, we actually, my husband's in the military and we have a PCS down to another state. So my entire care team was changing. And so it was kind of a lot of change for me at once with the baby and my care and our life and uprooting our entire family and all of that. But it was something I was considering, and I looked into getting a doula. Now, I don't think a doula is necessary, and I ended up not having a doula at my birth because I'll tell you, we'll get to that, how quickly she came. But the doula was actually, I was really fortunate to find a doula that helped me for free. Because just like being in the military, it's a huge move, all of that, it was just not in our budget to hire a doula. I'm not saying that they're not worth the money. I truly think that the doula that helped me was really helpful. For me, it wasn't in the budget. So I think that there are alternatives. I'll try and link some like good alternatives to getting a doula or birthing, you know, techniques and all that stuff that can help you during labor. But for me, then I started to look for a doula. And this is where it was really, really helpful because I did find someone, and she sat with me on the phone for an hour and she asked me all these questions that I had never even thought about. She's like, okay, do you want delayed cord clamping? Well, I was like, I don't even know what that is. And so she sent me all these resources on it, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, okay, like I understand that. And so that was something that I got to think about beforehand. And so they asked me after I gave birth to my second child, like, are we ready to clamp the cord? And I asked these questions, and that kind of like allowed me to think, okay, yes, we are ready based on what she said. And now again, I'm not trying to sway anyone on any medical decisions, so I won't tell you what we did, but I just want you to kind of know that those are things to start to think about and know. And like, I was really happy that I discussed those things with her because of how quickly my little girl came into the world. I wouldn't have had like any time to think about those things. And so that's kind of another reason why I want you to start to think about, if I had to have a natural birth, even if you wanted to go in having an epidural, you don't always get that option depending on how quickly they come into this world. So knowing some breathing techniques, knowing you know, just anything that might involve an unmedicated birth that you want to have options for, or understand like what your choices are. I think researching those and just practicing that breathing, even for the initial contractions before you get the epidural, stuff like that, understanding those things I think are really important. So like for me, my daughter came, like I mentioned, just under 38 weeks, and I was like convinced for like the first half of the day that they were just Braxton Hicks. I never had them with my son. I didn't really know like how different they felt with normal contractions. And so I just kind of like labored a little while. I was like, oh, I'm like, that was kind of painful. And then like probably about like 3 o'clock that day, I was like, I don't know, am I actually be in labor? Because I downloaded an app and I started to time them. And they were like 10 minutes apart and like a minute long. And I was like, I don't think Braxton Hicks are this consistent. And then probably about 5 o'clock, they were like 5 minutes apart and like 1 minute long, or 1 minute long and 1 hour duration, which is like when they're like, hey, you should go to the hospital. So I would think I was just kind of like waiting for my husband to get home. And I think my body was too. I think because I wanted my husband to attend the birth. He had class all day with the military, with training, and he like couldn't be home till 5. And like my mother-in-law, she was coming at 3 o'clock that day to come watch my son so that we had childcare, because she was planning on watching him the 2 weeks before I went into labor, so we didn't have to find childcare down here before I went on maternity leave. And so I think like my body was just kind of like holding it together until like she got here and then my husband got here, and like both of them were like convinced that I was like, I don't know, not being dramatic, I think, but like that I wasn't really in labor. I think we all were. I think that's why I labored so long at home, because I was like, oh, there's no way at 37 weeks, 5 days that I'm going into labor, right? So I just kind of like held out, and I was just like, this is fine. And in my head, I think I was thinking, this is gonna get worse. Everyone talks about how awful it is. And so it's like, these contractions are gonna get worse. So like, just hang in there, Lauren. If you wanna do this natural birth thing, like you need to just chill and like muscle through these contractions. And so about, my husband got home, we had to like take care of some things with my son and all this stuff. So by the time we got to the hospital, it was about 7 o'clock. And we rolled up in there, I walked up, and I was like, I just signed in, and they were like, all right, we'll get you checked out. And I had someone, they looked at me, they, looked at my cervix, and they were like, I'm just gonna have someone else look at this, make sure. I'm like, I think you just have a far back cervix. And they had another person and look at me, and they were like, were you planning on having an epidural? And I was like, I really want to try to do this naturally. And they're like, well, you came at the right time to do it naturally, because you were 10 centimeters dilated, and you were gonna be having this baby like now. And I was like, okay, we're having this baby now. And I just like could not believe I was so ready. Like, they sent me home with my previous birth. Like, I thought I was ready. They were like, no, you could labor on for another week. Like, and so that's what I was thinking. I was like, oh, maybe like last time they told me I could have these contractions for like another week. And I was like, I don't know, but if you say so. So that's why I was like so surprised. And then they just wheeled me into labor and delivery. And I didn't really have time to like think about anything, which was good because I had already thought about all of the things that I wanted to do. And so for me, it was like really great that I had that option. They broke my water, and within probably like 10 minutes, I had that baby. I had 3 contractions that I pushed them out. And I will say, like, it was pretty painful. Once they broke my water, I felt an immense amount of pressure, and pushing was probably some of the most pain I've had in my life. But it was so short-lived that I don't even remember like it being that bad. I'm like, I'm not ready to have another baby, but I would do it again, because like, yes, it is an immense amount of pain, but like your body also just like takes over, and it's, I don't know, like I felt like just a much better connection to the entire experience being unmedicated. And then the after birth part was also just significantly better. I felt so much more aware of my body. I was not like, I didn't have crazy shakes. I didn't feel like groggy or anything, because I, was able to eat during the day. I didn't have like the shakes from the Pitocin or anything like that. And so like, I was able to breastfeed my baby within probably like 20-30 minutes of delivering her. And I was able to do skin to skin. They let me do skin to skin for 2 hours. And then they came and took all of our measurements. My previous care, which was in a different state, they immediately, like, we did skin to skin for maybe 5 minutes. Like I said, I really couldn't hold her. Then they took her and did all the measurements. I really liked how they did this with my care team in the state that I'm in now. And that's where I think like it's really important to know, like, your experience with the same body could just be different, a lot of it just based on your care team. And I think that was like a huge difference for us. We were really, really pleased with the care team that we had in our new state of residence. And so that was really important for me too. So I really just wanted to kind of like talk through those experiences. If I had to make a decision again for my 3rd birth, I definitely would be picking to do a unmedicated birth. Now, that's not to say that like if something doesn't happen that I wouldn't opt to do an epidural, but I think like in my next birth, just based on my experience and just everything else that I've read, I think that I would do a unmedicated birth again. Now, like I said, I think the most important thing is just to do your research, know what your options are, and have backup plans. So not everything is going to go according to plan, and certainly I was not planning on having her so early. I'm really glad that I did a lot of preparation beforehand, because I thought I had more time. And I honestly like kept putting off some of the stuff that my doula was sending me, because I was like, oh, I have a little more time to look at this. But I'm really glad that I ended up looking at it when I did. And I'm just super happy about that. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any experiences, please drop them in the comments, and I hope that we can have a really great discussion about this. Like I said, I'm not trying to sway anyone one way or the other or shame anyone for doing one way or the other. I just wanted to share my experience, and I think that we just need more knowledge out there and just more kind of more experience, people who have done it both ways. So thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this content, I regularly put out homesteading and mom content at least once or twice a month, and I hope that this was helpful. If this was helpful, please share it with your friends, like, and subscribe. Talk to you guys all later.